purification ceremony, groundbreaking ceremony, I think what it'd be called, where they bring in, they have purifying salt and water and sake and do their ceremony. And also another aspect of Shintoism is the how it relates to the emperor. Now the emperor basically has been absconded or hijacked several times in Japanese history by whatever military class. And the recent example was during the war. And in this case, the emperor was used for as a justification for military action against other countries. Shintoism, in its purest form, believes that the Japanese are the pure race and the superior race. And of course, if you were taking over a country, including this country itself, during the feudal ages or the Middle Ages in this country, there were many wars, almost an ongoing process. Just in this country itself, well, the first thing you wanted to do was have the emperor on your side. And so frequently he was controlled by whatever military class. In fact, this Nara itself used to be the ancient capital, and Kyoto has been alternatively the ancient capital, and this is where the emperor, at least if he did not reside in these capitals, why they were capitals, then he at least had a major residence, and that was the feudal government justified themselves around him in many cases. Like I said, the most recent example was during the war, where the Tojo took advantage of Emperor Hirohito, and of course the ongoing conflict is whether the emperor voluntarily participated or was coerced into participating. I don't know if anybody will ever know, and it depends on who you ask and what day it is and what's the latest book that came out. Probably he very much happily cooperated, as much as I can tell, and I'm no historian, but I think the general opinion is that he happily cooperated, but that's not unusual. The next is Christianity. Now, only about 2%, at the most, perhaps 1.5% of Japanese consider themselves Christians. Only about 1.5% of Japanese consider themselves as Christian. But I think you would hardly recognize them as Christians. Maybe they go to church. I mean, the same can be said about Americans. I mean, we define ourselves as Christians, but do we go to church or not? The best way to define Christianity in Japan is that it is Christianity light. Of all of these religions that you see, Christianity is the most dogmatic, but Japanese Christians are not by nature, not dogmatic people. Therefore, they do very little proselytizing, almost none whatsoever. And probably very seldom do they read the Bible. They don't take it that literally. They are not, Japanese in general are not attracted to dogma or black and white interpretations of anything. Although Christianity has the most potential for that kind of interpretation, it does not fit that role here in this country. For example, even people that are Christians or define themselves as Christians, I think most American Christians would hardly recognize them as such. Many of the people that frequent my temple, although not, we can talk about this later, but I don't really have a congregation. Most Buddhist temples do not really have a congregation. Many people that frequent my temple or come to seek me out, to make friends with me, or to have conversations with me, these people frequently are Christians. And I know other Zen priests and even Zen masters that are Christians. Now these are separate, because it's Christianity with its black and white, fundamentally black and white interpretation and its own separate dogma, it doesn't mix as well with others, but it's not that unusual to find Japanese priests, Zen priests, that are actually Christians, and the people that in the future will officially join my congregation when so-called congregation, when I am allowed to start having one, these people thus far are Japanese Christians, or would define themselves as Christians. And one of the reasons they are attracted to me is, well, maybe they like me, and also because I have some Christian background. In my case, for example, I spent 3 months in a Benedictine monastery. And of course, I was raised in America, therefore, whether I like it or not, or accept it or reject it or not, I am by birth a Christian. I have that background. And this is, so in terms of comparative religion, I can speak with them on subjects that are not available, that most people cannot talk about or not aware of. Typical Japanese priest knows very little about Christianity. Typical Japanese person knows very little about Christianity or Buddhism. And these people, another reason these Japanese Christians are attracted to me is, in the future, if and when I develop a cemetery, they want to be buried in my temple. They want me to do their funerals. They want a Buddhist funeral, even though they are Christian. And for them, that equals a Japanese funeral. They don't distinguish so much as Buddhist and Christian. They want a traditional Japanese funeral, which is Buddhist. It's not Shinto, it's not folk, it's not Confucian, it's Buddhist. Buddhism basically deals with death in Japan, memorial services, funerals, and so on. Christianity was introduced in Japan in 1549. That was Catholicism by Saint Francis Xavier. And he was the first missionary to bring Christianity in, and not surprisingly, immediately had problems with the local feudal government through his influence and his taking control over property. This is a problem that, I suppose with lots of religions, but Christianity or Roman Catholicism, when they came in, I think they were fairly successful, at least enough to challenge the shogunate or the feudalistic government, and with their acquisition of wealth of the Roman Church and the acquisition of property, which seemed to be a habit of theirs, they were quickly thrown out. That was kind of a problem. And also the Japanese were not used to this this kind of intrusion or religious invasion. And also Christianity or Catholicism, almost by definition, has a very powerful dogma, and that was a challenge, and that was one of the few religions that was immediately thrown out in this country. Of course, it came back several times and exists here today, but it is not very attractive to the Japanese in general because of its dogmatic background. The Japanese are fundamentally repelled by strong opinions, which is why they've had problems absorbing Christianity. Now, when I'm talking about fundamentally they have problems with absorbing certain strong opinions, I don't just mean in the religious sense. You will very seldom find a Japanese person who will come out straight out and tell you exactly what they think. This just doesn't occur in this society. It's considered a rude thing to do, among other things. And they generally do not, say, cultivate their opinions, and if they do, they certainly don't share them. Religion is a potentially offensive subject, and so the Japanese in general do not discuss this. In general, they do not discuss such issues in public. Not so much out of shyness, it's just a very polite way of avoiding offense. In the West, we have sort of like the Socratic method, or whatever you want to call it, where we resolve things through conflict. This is not the way it's done in Asia, or in Japan, particularly in Japan. They're much too polite about that. In a way, it makes for a more cohesive society and so on, but very difficult to get a direct answer, if not impossible to get a direct answer from a Japanese person on anything that really matters. Nowadays, in terms of how these religions overlap, in Christianity, for